Hello everyone, and welcome to our next video series around the interdisciplinary literacy practices located in the reading and writing standards. Today we are going to investigate and look at practice number 4, which says utilize receptive and expressive language arts to better understand self, others, and the world. I'm Carol Mullins. I'm the KVEC Literacy Instructional Specialist, and I have with me today Rebecca King, who was a member of the Reading Writing Standards Review and Development Committee and is able to include insight to the intent behind our standards and the literacy practices as we go along. And she's also going to share an instructional strategy with student work that actually addresses this particular literacy practice. One thing I want to do as a reminder is the literacy practices are not strategies. The literacy practices are intended to be a part of how the type of practices that teachers look at and develop a strategy around that will help kids reach the highest level and rigor of our standards.
So Carol, when we think about practices, the practices are the opportunities the students will engage in, what we want them to do, the kind of thinking we want the students to do. So we design our instructional strategy so that we put students in a situation that's going to allow them to engage in that practice.
Right. That's a very, very good description because there has been a little confusion about the practices themselves. Are they required? No, but they are. They will take your students to a higher level of learning. So let's dig right in and look at practice 4. Now, our goal for this session is that we build an understanding around the fact that the employment of both receptive and expressive elements values all language arts as interrelated and critical to the meaning-making process. These strategies address that we're going to share with you today. This practice causes kids to think deeper, and that's what we want students to do. And the ultimate result of thinking deeper always tends to be some type of written response. So what we're trying to do with this practice is how do you get kids to think deeply using receptive and expressive elements so that it prepares them to gather the evidence, the facts they need, the information they need in order to write a written response. So let's take just a minute and talk about just receptive and expressive language. Now, as adults, we get this. We understand that. But from a very young age, kids need instruction to understand this is how we receive our information, and this is how we express that information. So you're seeing the list on the screen. When we're talking about receptive language, we're talking about plain old listening, reading, or viewing a visual to begin to gather the information we need in order to express ourselves, whether it be through speaking, writing, or drawing a picture as visually representing. So in our classrooms, the big expressive part is writing. So we're trying to teach kids how to, using this practice is trying to teach kids how to gather that information, how to receive it and analyze it in order basically to write about it, because that's how our students are assessed. Because when we think about receptive and expressive, we're talking about teacher assignments too. And we want to allow our kids to have those opportunities to use all of these, receptive and expressive, at some point in our instruction. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is a page from the actual Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing, because pages 384 through 390 of the document is where there are additional information about the 10 disciplinary literacy practices. And what you're seeing on the screen there is number 4, which is what we're looking at. And then we have a graphic there, a box with possible teacher actions and possible student actions. And I'm not going to read that, but when we're talking about possible teacher actions, we're talking about skills that kids must be taught. And when we look at this, we're providing instructions so that kids learn to read like a writer and write like a reader. Well, possible student actions that can cause this to happen at a higher level is the teacher-designed assignment, because this is the practice. The teacher will actually design the strategy and the instruction that helps a student be involved in this type of practice. And the things that jump out are for possible student actions, the intent is to help them reflect and have a deep and critical understanding of whatever the content is, whatever content area, and that they are actively engaged in this listening, reading, and viewing experience. Now, that's just a quick summary of what the practice itself is. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, and she's going to share a classroom strategy that she's actually done with her students and is sharing student work with us that addresses both receptive and expressive language arts in a classroom instructional setting.
Okay, Carol. So I'd like to begin by saying that this example that I'm using today is just one of many ways that you can set up your instructions so that students are engaged in literacy practice number 4. And I made an intentional effort here with this lesson to include as many of those as I could. So you'll see that during the course of the lesson that my students were listening and viewing and reading the lyrics of the song that we used as well. So I tried to be intentional in that. And we did have speaking and writing as our expressive component. So intentionally I was trying to pull in as many of those as possible. And so while I didn't have them actually visually represent anything in the expressive portion, we were viewing a painting and focusing on visual literacy and how important it is for students to be able to make meaning from everything in the world around them. One of the things that I often tell my students, and that I do believe, is that everything's an argument. Like everything that you see in your daily world, in print and media, of any sort, is essentially making an argument. And if we can teach students to use logical thinking and reasoning and be able to listen to the world around them and read the messages around them and view the products around them intentionally and thoughtfully, then everything that they produce, which is the expressive element of that language, everything they produce is going to be at a higher level, and it's going to be more well thought out. It's just going to be better. And so in order to get students to the level of rigor that the standards intend, we have to focus on allowing students to engage in these literacy practices. So this lesson is actually a lesson that began as a poetry, part of a poetry unit. And so I paired the painting Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, which is very famous, with a song by Don McLean, which is Vincent's Starry, Starry Night. So it's a lyrical poem, because songs are lyrical poetry, and so we're doing lyrical poetry. But in pairing the two pieces, you're able to bring students to a deeper understanding of that concept, which I'm trying to get them to focus on, is mood, and the mood of a work and how that shifts and changes, and how an artist or an author is able to manipulate the audience's mood intentionally. And so that's the focus of the lesson. And so we start out with Starry, Starry Night, and I put the picture up on the screen, and I want to be very clear that the handout that I have attached to this lesson, that'll be in the drive that Carol keeps with all these resources, that I start by giving them that clean handout, and as we go through the PowerPoint with the painting up, and I one at a time click on the questions come in, and I give my students 2 or 3 minutes to look at the painting, reflect on the question, and write an answer. I do not prompt them or tell them what to think or answer questions, because the whole point of the exercise is for them to be able to view the text, and in this case that's a painting, but to be able to view that text and draw their own conclusions. And students of all ages are capable of looking at this painting and noticing the difference in the light in the sky and the darkness of the village. Like, it's a sharp enough contrast that even very small children could make that basic observation. So you want to create an environment where students feel like they can observe what they see, and that you're not looking for something profound, right? In the beginning, they just need to be comfortable with being able to pick out the obvious. And in this case, that light and dark contrast is the obvious. So that's important. So I click through the questions with them, and we go through the questions, and they write their answers first. And we do that one question at a time.
And as Rebecca's changing slides, one thing I did omit earlier was the resources that go with this. The link at the end of the PowerPoint has those resources for you, and they're all available on the holler. So we will address those later.
And so what I've done here on these next few slides is I took each question and I just randomly pulled a 2 or 3 of my students' responses, so you could get a feel for that this wasn't like a long drawn out process, and I'm just asking them to write down what they observed that would be an answer to that question. So you can see that in response to how does the author's use of light affect the painting's mood, the light makes it feel peaceful and calming when you look upon it. It makes the painting feel lively and hopeful. The light brings out the peacefulness of the painting. The light contrasts the dark, makes me feel content and peaceful. Because when you explain mood to students, you tell them how it makes you feel, right? And you have to be careful to distinguish between mood and tone, because those are 2 different things. Tone is an artist or author's attitude toward the subject itself, and mood is how the reader or the viewer feels. And so you make that distinction for your students, and then to answer that question, basically all they have to do is tell you how they feel when they look at it. What do you notice about the colors in the painting? Makes me feel peaceful and relaxed. Heavy contrast of light and dark. They're light colored and blended into dark ones. The colors are 2 different hues, one warm, one cold. There's a heavy contrast between the gloomy navy and bright yellow. So you can see that there's a variety of answers here. And what you want to be careful not to do when you're discussing what students have written and you're asking them to share their answers is you don't want to make a big deal out of one answer being much better than another answer, because they're all basically observations. And so as long as what they have said is relevant to the painting, then you want to be encouraging.
Right, Rebecca. And when just with question 1 and 2, you have had students delve deeper and look critically and gather information that will be so important later when they're asked to give a written response.
They will have done the thinking. How and to what extent do the colors impact the mood? You can see that the students still tend to go toward the colors are light and make a peaceful feeling. It makes the audience feel serene and at peace because there's a balance between light and dark. I thought that was a particularly good observation, that there is a balance in the painting. So students are able to think about that. And then, of course, I ask them from the mood to write a theme which is conveyed in the work. And I know that often you see theme, people will say things like, peace or hope or love or jealousy, but I teach my students that when you're writing a theme, that you should express that as one complete thought, because a theme is supposed to be a universal idea, a universal truth, something that everyone has a concept of. So I try to encourage them to go beyond just a universal idea, which would be jealousy or peace, and write it as a clear sentence. So there's nothing more peaceful than the dead of night. There's a sense of peace in things that can seem dark. One can achieve peace by pointing themselves toward heaven. Nature and mankind coexist in peace. And again, these are all answers students gave without prompting. I didn't set them up for what the painting was about and all of that. And of course, Starry Night is very famous, and these were seniors in high school who are familiar with it. So you might have to do more legwork with a younger group of students, and that would be fine. But really, if you just encourage them to observe what they see, they're going to come close. You'll be surprised at what they'll come up with. So once we've looked at the painting and they've kind of got the theme and the mood of the painting in mind, then I allow them to listen to the song. And I have most of the lyrics here on the screen. It's a long song, so I didn't put all the lyrics on the PowerPoint, but I do actually pull up on YouTube and let them listen to the entire song. And Don McLean it's a very pleasant song. It's kind of, mournful and that kind of thing, but it's a very, very good listen, so the students don't get too put out with being asked to listen to the song. And then I do basically the same thing again, only I tweak the questions to be specific to what I want them to glean from the song, which is different, of course, because it's a different medium. So how does the author use rhyme to create mood in the song? And that one, I got some really interesting answers, and they were able to pick up on the fact that while there is rhyme, there's not really a set rhyme scheme in this poem, which is interesting because it still really does set the mood. What do you notice about the diction in the song? And if you're working with younger students who haven't learned that word choice is called diction, then maybe you call it word choice. How and to what extent does the diction impact the mood of this work? This question really asks students to think about the words that the artist is using, and how do those words make you feel as a listener? How do I feel differently because it says suffered for your sanity as opposed to saying something else? And so allowing students to answer that question without helping them will give you really good answers. Keeping the mood of the song in mind, write a theme which is conveyed in this work. So you can see that as far as it goes, this is a fairly short and quick activity. We're not spending forever on it, but the kids will get quite a bit of prep work from it. How does the author use rhyme? Most of the words at the end of the lines rhyme, though with no clear pattern, and they often use very dissimilar words such as gray and day, daffodils, and chills. So they've observed quite a bit there. The rhyme makes the song like a lullaby, once again creating a calming mood like the painting. So without me even asking them to, this person's already made a connection back to the painting. Most of the words rhyming are contrasting each other. There's no consistent rhyme scheme. So they're able to, again, just observe what's in front of them because I didn't tell them. I let them find it out for themselves. And that is maybe one of the most difficult things for us as teachers to do, is to design an opportunity for students to think critically and then allow them that opportunity without trying to help them too much. Like you don't have to prep them. They can figure it out if the answer's in front of them. Will they say it exactly like you want them to? Maybe, maybe not, but they'll get there. And that's what you want for them, is for them to be able to get there in their own way, in their own time. Very important. The diction, now my students have spent, they're seniors, and so we've learned the difference between formal and middle diction and that kind of thing, and so they refer to this as middle diction. Words and phrases that most people can understand or relate to, negative connotations, provides a lot of imagery and descriptive details. The word choice is very sad and airy. It is using artistic terms to depict mental illness, provides imagery. So you can see that different students went in different directions and got totally different things from the song and from the diction. But that doesn't mean that any one of those answers is wrong, right? We want them to think for themselves. How and to what extent does the diction impact the mood of this work? It strongly influences the work's mood because it captures the hidden suffering of the artist. It makes the song more peaceful and almost soothing. The diction keeps the mood simple and calming. It impacts the mood by giving listeners the beautiful details he describes, making them feel sad. So we get a lot, again, of different perspectives on how mood is impacted. And then their themes for this song: one should slow down to admire nature's beauty. Sometimes beauty needs to be listened to rather than just seen. People may be suffering on the inside and misunderstood by the outside. Some things are not appreciated in their moment. Hints of an author's struggle can suddenly come through in their work. So we got a lot of range again in the answers, which is good. What I want, because you don't want all of your essays to end up being the same. And then, so we did this first part on one day, and it took us the majority of a 50-minute class period to go through and do the analysis and everybody share their responses and discuss and that kind of thing. And then the next day, when my students came in, I gave them a ready, set, write prompt. I gave them this tool and this prompt, and we did it as a timed writing. So they had 40 minutes to come up with the answers. So the examples I'm going to show you, I just pulled their introductions. I didn't do full essays. But keep in mind that they did these in 40 minutes, that it was a timed response. After careful consideration of the song, Vincent's Starry, Starry Night by Don McLean and the painting Starry Night by Van Gogh, differences in the mood of each emerge. Write an essay in which you discuss the mood of each work and describe how they differ. In your analysis, consider to what extent the medium of the work impacts the mood. And so that was their prompt. And I got some very good essays in 40 minutes. But I got good essays in 40 minutes because they had already done the thinking, right? Students must have thought about something before they can write about it. If you give them a cold prompt, it's very hard to get much. This one, comparing moods. The topic of mood is rather thought-provoking to the mind, for each and every person has a different interpretation of what they may feel. These feelings produce a variety of emotions and connect people in a strong manner. The very same is true for the painting Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh and the song Vincent by Don McLean. Although both the song and the painting are very similar, their moods differ drastically because of the medium used to produce the song and painting. Mediums can create all the difference in the magnificent world of art and can convey a beautiful meaning to those who seek it. So you can see that this student in 40 minutes has been able to write a fairly convincing introduction with a clear thesis statement, which is our goal, for students to be able to do that. This is another example of an introduction I got. Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night was one of the most prominent art pieces of the Renaissance era. Though it was undervalued at the time it was painted, its meaning behind it has been highly debated. Starry Night has also influenced many other works of art, such as the song Vincent's Starry, Starry Night by Don McLean. This song discusses the imagery of the painting, but also talks about the painter himself and the struggles he had. Both works of art, however, produce two different moods. Though they were produced hundreds of years apart, they move viewers in different directions, as the painting's mood is calm and relaxed, while the song's mood is sad sad and gloomy. Now, do I think that this was the very best thesis statement I ever got? Probably not. It contradicts itself a little bit. But are they basically focused on the prompt itself, and are they going to move in a direction where they're doing what I ask them to? Most likely. So while it may not be the most amazing response, it certainly is an adequate response. Don McLean, a popular artist in the 1960s and 1970s, drew inspiration from an unlikely candidate for a song titled Vincent. McLean paints his own picture through song using a similar theme to Van Gogh's Starry Night. That painting is one of the most popular paintings to have ever existed. It has been examined and studied for years, though it may seem simplistic on the surface. The song and painting have a similar mood through imagery, but McLean's song examines the mind behind the painter and the suffering that is not always obvious. Starry Night has a calm mood with a brightness that projects hopefulness. So, again, could this be stronger? Yes. Is it moving in the right direction? Certainly. And does the student have something to say? He does, or she does. And so that's the important thing. If you give students a real opportunity to think about what you want them to write about before you ask them to do that, they're always going to have more to say, and they're going to give you a stronger response. And if you structure your timed writing response practice in this way, so that it's a logical part of the instruction that you're doing in your class anyway, you're not going to burn students out with on-demand practice and that kind of thing. It's just a logical way for them to convey the thinking that they did the day before in a way that you can assess their learning. And that is, I think, a sound instructional practice for us as teachers. And if we allow students, if we set up our instruction in such a way that we're putting them in a position to use these interdisciplinary literacy practices, then everything's going to be at a higher level.
Absolutely. And one of the things that immediately popped into my mind as we're doing this, you are using narrative to enhance the skills for argumentation and informational explanatory writing. In other words, you can't do any of the three modes of writing without evidence and supporting details. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's hard for kids to make a distinction when we say, today we're going to write an argument. Mm-hmm. Today I want you to do informational. It's all blended together, and you address that from the very beginning about everything's an argument. Mm-hmm. So what I want to share with you on the screen right now, you can access the resources. There's a handout with information that Rebecca used that she gave her students for start this activity with the questions and some additional information on it. The thing about it is a Word document, so you can change this to whatever you choose, not necessarily Starry Night, but at least you have an example to go by. And, of course, with younger students, you're not going to have this many questions. You're going to be focusing in on different things maybe than what Rebecca was focusing with her high schoolers. Mm-hmm. So you may not have as many questions.
And it would depend on what standard you're getting to.
Absolutely.
Or what concept or skill that you're focused on in your lesson.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Also, in the resources, it was the Ready, Set, Write. There was a version of it that we got on a slide, but the entire blank document is available to you on this drive. Now, obviously, if you're looking at this from video, you cannot click on this and get the resources, but if you will go to theholler.org and visit Reading and Writing Standards Literacy which is the name of my holler. All of these things are in folders right on with a link right on the holler. Usually it will be below the actual PowerPoint you're looking at right now. But it's very easy to access these, and as I said, they're both in Word, so you can adapt them. There's my email address if you have any questions, and we thank you for listening today.